It starts on the west coast. Those were the words. Not my words. I want to be clear about that before anything else. My name is Margaret Calloway. I was a retired school librarian from Fresno, California. I drove a Honda. I watered my tomatoes on Thursday mornings. I was not the kind of person who says, I died and God showed me the cities that are going to sink. And yet here I am. I was clinically dead for 7 minutes and 14 seconds on a gurney in Community Regional Medical Center after a truck ran a red light on Shore Avenue and hit my car. What happened in those 7 minutes and 14 seconds is the reason I am speaking now, after 2 years of silence. I want to correct something you think you know about what happens when people die. It is not a tunnel. It is not a slow drift toward white light. It is a displacement. One moment you are somewhere, the next you are somewhere else entirely. And that somewhere else is more real than anything you have ever touched. And in that place, I was shown the California coast, specific cities, water in streets I recognized, moving at a speed that was wrong, the ground going down, not the water coming up. And I was told when. I never planned to say any of this out loud. I spent 2 years, almost to the month, not saying a single word about what I was shown. Not to my children, not to my sister, not to the woman at my book club who has known me for 11 years and who I trust with most things. Because the moment you say something like this out loud, you become a certain kind of person, and I was not ready to become that person. It was a Friday night in March of 2023. I want to be specific because the specifics are the only thing I have to offer you. Anyone can tell you they had a vision. The specifics are what make it either real or not real, and you can decide for yourself which one this is. I had been at my book club. We met every other Friday at a coffee shop on Champlain Drive in Clovis. 6 women, 4 years of meeting, and that night we had been discussing a novel about the Dust Bowl, about people who had waited too long to leave Oklahoma, who had told themselves that the worst would not happen to them specifically. I remember thinking on the drive home that the book had been sadder than I expected. I remember checking the clock on my dashboard at a red light on Champlain. It was 9:38. I thought about whether I needed gas. The gauge was not quite at a quarter tank. I thought I would get it in the morning. That was the last thing I remember thinking in my body. The paramedics' report says clinical death was declared at 9:47 p.m. Return of spontaneous circulation at 9:54 p.m. 7 minutes and 14 seconds. That is the number I carry. 7 minutes and 14 seconds is not a long time to be dead by the standards of documented NDEs. But time does not work the same way over there. What I experienced in those 7 minutes felt longer and more complete and more real than the previous 61 years of my life combined. That is not a metaphor. I am being as precise as I know how to be. The last physical sensation was my hands on the steering wheel. Not pain. I want to correct something I thought I knew about dying, which is that it hurts. The crossing itself did not hurt. What I felt in the final instant was the complete and sudden absence of the steering wheel under my hands, and then the complete and sudden absence of every physical thing I had ever known. And then I was somewhere else. Not gradually, not in a tunnel. One instant I was in the car. The next instant I was not in any car or any room or any world I recognized. But I was somewhere. And that somewhere was more real than anything I can name. I want to be honest with you about the first thing that hit me when I arrived. Not a vision, not a message, not a voice. The first thing was a smell. I know how that sounds. But what happened is that before I saw anything, before I heard anything, before any of what I am going to tell you about the cities and the water, there was a smell. Not blood, not antiseptic, something older than any of those things, like dry earth just before it rains. Petrichor is the word I had to look up afterward, because I didn't know it before. That is what the crossing smells like. I do not know why. I am just telling you what it was. And then there was a sound, not silence, not music. The sound of that place was a frequency, low, sustained, more felt in the chest than heard in the ears, though I had no chest anymore, and no ears. The nearest thing I can compare it to is the lowest note on a church organ, held for an impossible duration, never beginning and never ending. And within that sound was something I can only call welcome. Not a word, not a voice saying welcome. The sound itself was the welcome. And I understood that I had been heard and known, and that nothing about who I was a problem. I want you to let that settle, because it matters for everything that comes after it. The love of that place is not something I mention in passing. The love of that place is the thing that makes everything I was shown undeniable to me. Because what came next was not comfortable. What came next was a gift I did not ask for and would not have chosen. And it was given to me inside that love. I will tell you about Gerald first, because Gerald came before the cities, and you need to understand the order of things. Gerald was my husband. He died of a cardiac event in January of 2019, in our kitchen, on a Tuesday morning, while I was in the backyard. He was 63 years old. We had been married for 38 years. The version of me that existed after Gerald was quieter and smaller, and moved through the world at a different speed, and I had accepted that as permanent. The first thing that happened in that place was that I understood Gerald was all right, not that I saw him. I need to be careful here because I do not want to tell you more than I know. What I received was a knowing about him so complete and so warm and so final that I wept. And I want to tell you something about weeping in a place where you have no body. The feeling is not diminished. If anything, it was larger than any weeping I had ever done in physical form, because there was nothing to contain it. And it was not grief. It was relief. The kind of relief you feel when someone you have been worried about finally calls to say they are safe. Gerald was safe. He was where he was supposed to be. And the love between us did not end when he died. It was present in that place as something structural, as something I could perceive. That is what I mean when I tell you the love is the evidence. I am not asking you to take my word for the cities on faith alone. I am telling you that what I experienced in that place was so coherent and so specific that when the vision of the coast came, I had already been given enough evidence of where I was that I could not dismiss what I was shown. It did not come as a picture at first. It came as words, simple words, spoken, and I have to tell you that spoken is not quite right. There was no voice in the sense of vocal cords producing sound, and yet the communication was as clear and specific as anything I have ever heard with physical ears. Spoken in a register I will call, for lack of anything better, the register of absolute fact. The words were, "It starts on the west coast." I did not know at first what it referred to. I heard those words, and my first response was a kind of alertness. The way you feel when someone says something you recognize matters before you know why it matters. And I asked, and asking in that place is not the same as forming a sentence. It was more like turning toward something, directing attention. I asked what starts, and then I was shown. Being shown something in that place is not like watching a screen, and it is not like a dream. The nearest I have come to describing it is this. It was as if I was inside the event while also being above it, simultaneously at street level and at an altitude of several thousand feet, seeing both at once without confusion. And what I was placed inside and above was water. Water in streets. I knew the streets. That is the thing that still makes the breath go out of me when I try to talk about it. Not because I had been to these specific cities recently. Fresno is inland. But the way you recognize a place you have seen in photographs all your life. I knew where I was looking, and what I was seeing was water moving through those streets at a speed that was wrong. Not the speed of a wave, not the speed of a storm surge, the speed of something descending, the ground going down, not the water coming up. The buildings at the waterfront tilting slightly, the way a ship lists when the ballast shifts, and the water filling the space that the ground had vacated. Quiet, almost quiet. The sound of it was not a roar. It was a low, continuous sound, like the sound of a very large amount of weight settling. Subsidence. That is the engineering word I found afterward. Subsidence is when the earth underneath a structure loses its integrity and sinks. From groundwater depletion, from seismic activity, from combinations of things that have been building for decades and finally reach a point of no return. The Bay Area has documented subsidence risk. The port of Long Beach sits on land that has been sinking for years, and the Port Authority publishes reports about it. I spent a long time after the crash finding the geology to match what I was shown. And I found it. In public records, in engineering reports. What I was shown was a real process, accelerated to a point of crisis those reports acknowledge is possible. I want to be precise about what I saw and where the line is. I was shown the Bay Area waterfront. The Bay Bridge was still standing. The downtown waterfront district was not. I was shown a harbour town on the Central Coast, smaller, with fishing boats listing in what had been a main street. I was shown the Los Angeles Basin, the coast from Santa Monica south through Long Beach, the land near the ports going down, the water filling, quiet and terrible and slow. And then I was shown San Diego, and San Diego was standing. I did not understand that at first. I asked why, and the answer I received was not the geological explanation I was half expecting. The answer was, because San Diego is where people will go. And in that moment, I understood that I was not being shown a destruction map. I was being shown a refugee map. The places that would sink were being named so that the people in them could leave. The place that would remain was being named so people would know which direction to move. That distinction between a punishment and a warning has been the most important thing I carried back. I was not shown this because God was announcing judgment. I was shown this the way a doctor shows a patient a scan and says, "This is what is here. This is what it will do if nothing changes. And this is what you can do while there is still time." I asked about the time. I asked when, 3 times. And the answer was not a date. What I was told was a window. The phrasing I received, written in my journal within hours of being discharged, was, "Before the year turns twice from now." The crash was March of 2023. I have interpreted that to mean the beginning of the sequence before 2027. Not all at once, a sequence, already in motion. The question is not whether, but when in the sequence, and how far along people will be when it begins. I need to tell you why I finally broke the silence, because I think the reason matters. My daughter Lauren called me in January of 2024. She and her husband had found a house they loved in Huntington Beach, on the coast. She was calling to tell me they were thinking of making an offer. She was happy. She was excited. I could hear it in her voice, the kind of happiness that is already building the future in your mind. The kitchen where you will make Sunday dinners, the yard where eventually there might be grandchildren. I spent 2 days unable to speak. Those 2 days were me sitting with the question of whether my need to not become a certain kind of person was worth more than my daughter's safety. They were me arguing with myself about proof, about all the ways I might have invented the whole thing in the trauma of the crash. And they were me, finally, at 2 in the morning on the second night, understanding that if I stayed silent and something happened to Lauren, I would not survive it. I survived the crash. I would not have survived that silence. On the 3rd day I called her back, and I told her everything. She did not buy the house. I am not telling you this as proof. I am telling you this as the beginning of my understanding of what the mission was. I was not asked to warn the world or stand on a corner with a sign. The instruction I was given, the last thing I understood before I heard Lauren's voice pulling me back, was, tell the ones you love. Tell the ones who will move. Not everyone will. Tell the ones who will. I am not a prophet. I want to be very clear about that. I am a 63-year-old retired librarian from Fresno who drove a Honda and grew tomatoes and read books about the Dust Bowl, and one night in March was in the wrong place at the wrong time and ended up somewhere else for 7 minutes and 14 seconds. I am the least dramatic person I know. I did not want this. I would trade every second of that vision for Gerald back in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning. But I cannot unknow what I know. That is the weight I carry. Most days it does not feel like a mission. Most days it feels like having read the last page of a book that the people you love are still in the middle of, and not being able to tell them how it ends without sounding like you've lost your mind. It is lonely in a way that is hard to describe. It is the particular loneliness of knowing something you cannot prove, carrying something you did not ask for, and having to decide every day whether the discomfort of speaking is worth more or less than the discomfort of silence. I miss that place. I say that knowing how it sounds, and I say it anyway because it is true. I miss it the way you would miss the most peaceful place you have ever been if you were told you had to leave and could not go back for a while. I am not suicidal. I want to say that clearly. But the truth is that what I came back to is harder and thinner and louder than where I was. I have made peace with that. I have made peace with it because of Lauren. Because of the 4 people in my life who have made concrete decisions about where they live based on what I told them. Because of this conversation. The love of that place did not stay behind when I came back. I brought some of it with me. Not all of it, but enough to function. Enough to sit with you now and tell you something difficult with something other than fear. What I am asking of you is not complicated. I am not asking you to panic. I am not asking you to sell your house tomorrow or call your family in the middle of the night. What I am asking is that you stop holding so tightly to the idea that there is more time than there is. That thing you have been putting off, the conversation with your son or your daughter or your sister about where they live, the small persistent feeling you have had when you look at the news, when you look at the coast, when you feel that low frequency, not audibly, but somewhere in the chest, that feeling that something is building toward something. You have been holding that feeling loosely and keeping your mouth shut about it because you do not want to be a certain kind of person. I understand that. I lived in that for 2 years. Let it go. Not the knowledge, the silence around it. Let go of the protective distance you keep between what you sense and what you say to the people you love. That distance is not kindness. I thought it was kindness, and it was not. It was fear dressed up as consideration. Here is what I want you to do this week. One thing. Think of one person in your life who lives within 20 miles of the California coast. Your son, your daughter, your sister, your oldest friend. And call them. Not to warn them in dramatic terms, not to deliver a speech about what you heard from a retired librarian on the internet. Just call them and say, I have been thinking about you. I have been thinking about where you live. Have you thought about it lately? That is all. Plant a seed. A seed knows how to grow without you managing it. I planted a seed with Lauren, and she did not buy the house on the coast. I did not force her. I told her what I knew, and I loved her, and I trusted her to do what a person does when they have been told something true. You are watching this for a reason. You found this because something brought you here. Maybe it was an algorithm. Maybe it was a feeling. Maybe someone sent it to you and you almost didn't watch it, but then you did. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are here, and something in you recognized what I was carrying, because you have been carrying something similar, and you have been looking for permission to take it seriously. I am giving you that permission. Whatever is coming, and something is coming, the frequency is not my imagination, and it is not yours. I hope this reaches you while there is still time to make the call. Make the call.